Good evening, Falmouth. I am Troy Clarkson, and it's my pleasure once again to join you here live on election night with election night coverage here on Falmouth Community Television, FCTV, Falmouth's hometown TV station. I've been having the privilege for many years of providing you with election night coverage, and tonight, for the first time, I am thrilled to have a member of the Select Board and an old friend, Doug Brown, here with us to join us tonight to talk about the results, to hear from election officials here in town, to review the issues, and to really talk about the issues that are most important to you, the Falmouth voters. So welcome, Doug. We're very glad to have you here in studio live tonight to talk about this historic election day here in Falmouth and here in the United States.
Hey, Troy, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's quite a race we're having today, and I'm really excited to look over it.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And we were both talking to Town Clerk Michael Palmer a little while ago, earlier today, and an amazing show, I think, of civic commitment. 50% of eligible voters voted early before the polls opened today. And so usually in a local election, Doug, having 25% of people show up is about the norm. But in this important national election, with several local implications that we'll talk about this evening here in the studio, 1 out of every 2 voters actually made the commitment to either mail in a ballot or show up early. And that's really important. As we see in the stats provided by Michael Palmer that are up here on the screen, nearly 4,400 people voted early in person, and 10,000 voters voted by mail. So a full 50% of voters made that choice to go to the polls before they even opened today. And we'll go to Town Hall in just a few minutes and speak to the town clerk. FCTV Executive Director and crack live reporter Deb Rogers is there with Michael. And so we'll talk to them in a few minutes. But Doug, as someone who's been through a few elections in this community, both as an activist and as a candidate yourself, a 50% turnout for early voting is extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. I can't wait to see what the final number is, because I believe I heard on the news that it seemed like it was headed towards about 80 to 83% overall statewide. If that turns out to be true, that'll be pretty impressive.
It sure will, Doug. And again, I chatted with the town clerk just before I came over here to FCTV, and he was anticipating another 30% or so of voters will have voted in person today. So a full 80% turnout we expect here in Falmouth. And what we're going to do over the next hour or so is to talk about those results. And so we'll have those early voting results in just a couple of minutes here live on FCTV. And so there are several races to talk about. Of course, at the top of the ticket and top of mind for all of us is the race for President of the United States. And we'll have those local results for you, the early voting results, in just a few minutes. But Doug, there are several races of local import. Of course, we have a hotly contested state Senate seat, a vacant state representative seat, which of course is uncontested. So we can declare tonight first. We will declare here on FCTV that Tom Moakley has been declared the winner of that state representative seat for Falmouth and Martha's Vineyard. But there obviously is another state representative seat where incumbent David Vieira is being challenged by Kathy Fox Alfano, in several regional races, including county commissioners, and 6 ballot questions, 5 statewide and 1 here just for Barnstable County. So we have lots to unpack over the next hour, and we'll do that live right here in the studio for you, bringing you both live results. And then Doug and I, as 2 political veterans here in Falmouth, will talk to you about those results and provide commentary. So first time here in the studio on election night, Doug, how does it feel? And maybe talk about your experience. I know you actually went and voted today.
I did. First, I want to say thanks, congratulations to Tom Moakley. I think he's going to do well. He's a great, sharp kid. Yeah, I voted early this morning. My wife and I went together to Precinct 5. The parking lot was packed. It was really good to see such an early turnout. So there's a lot of early voters all the time, but this time seemed a lot more.
And every year when we do this show, both in May, in the local election, and every November, we talk about on this show, Doug, turnout. And usually in the local election, lament that 20 to 25% of people show up. But on a day like today, when 8 out of 10 people actually exercise that civic right to go and vote, that's an important endorsement for democracy.
It sure is. Yeah, everybody's really behind their candidates, whoever they are. I'm very excited and interested to see who's going to win the Senate race. That's a real That's an important one for Falmouth, I think.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because it's an interesting district, both towns on Cape here and Falmouth, and then running up the coastline on the South Shore. And the last two incumbents in that race, one has been from here on the Cape, of course, the incumbent Senator Susan Moran, who's running for Clerk of Courts unopposed. So
Right.
we will make another declaration here live on FCTV that Susan Moran has been declared the winner of the race for Barnstable County Clerk of Courts. But the seat that she's held for the last several years is obviously hotly contested by incumbent State Representative Dylan Fernandez from Falmouth and incumbent State Representative Matthew Muratori from Plymouth. And so the last two incumbents, Sue Moran from Falmouth and her predecessor Vinnie DiMacedo from Plymouth, this race really pits those two large population centers one against the other. It's going to, I think, be very interesting to see how that race shakes out.
It will be very interesting. I was interested to learn that Mr. Murator actually married a Falmouth girl, and that's partly why I think he's got such a strong showing in Falmouth. A lot of signs out, and mostly all on private property where they belong.
Well, so let's talk about that, because I know that's been an undercurrent, and both of us as people that stay connected to the political process here in Falmouth, that's something that a lot of people often talk about sign placement, and there are certain traditions here in Falmouth. There is a sign bylaw, but I believe that there was an actual Supreme Judicial Court case a few years ago that addressed the issue of political signs and free speech. And so, although it is tradition to only put signs out 30 days before an election and to only put them on private property, I believe, and I'll double check this, if you see me checking my phone throughout the night, I'm not texting with friends. I'm actually getting information. We do have several of our supporters of local elections out there that are sending information to us. In fact, just now, Reverend Nell Fields from the Wacoit Church is watching here on FCTV. And Nell, we appreciate your participation. So we'll be getting information from folks throughout the night. And if anyone knows that information on that SGC case from a few years ago, I think it originated in Bourne with some political signs. But it's interesting. Your thoughts on that?
I'd hoped that we wouldn't even worry about what those technicalities are with what the Supreme Court decided, because I like the old traditions that we have. It's respectful to keep the signs on private property. Putting them on public land, you know, I guess legally you can get away with it now, but to me it's a little disrespectful. I don't care for it. You know, there's a lot of old traditions that seem to be falling away. I'm a little disappointed actually with the new voting at town meeting. I really enjoyed it before when you'd stand up for your vote. It's what do you stand for? And when you have that responsibility to stand, your viewers at home can see what you're voting for. People in the room can see what you're voting for. It takes a little more guts to vote your conscience. Now we just sit there with the clickers. I think we've lost a little something there, and I hope maybe we can do both going forward.
Very interesting thought, and that's why these shows here on FCTV are always interesting, because with someone like Doug, who's a veteran, not only been on the select board, but been a civic volunteer for many years. How long have you been a town meeting member?
I think since 2005 or 6 or
so 19
somewhere in
years.
there.
19
Yeah.
years. I see how I did that quick math?
Yeah.
Right here live in the studio. Excellent. And so, Doug, let's talk about, in addition to that Senate race, we do have a state representative race. 14-year incumbent David Vieira is being challenged by Kathy Fox Alfano from Bourne. That seat with the redistricting and the census has changed a little bit. So let's talk about that, because here in Falmouth, as we talk about, it seems every time we do one of these shows, Falmouth, although it has 9 precincts, there are some precincts that tend to vote in every election at higher percentage than others. And of course, the most prominent of those is Precinct 1, which is primarily Woods Hole and a little bit of Sippawisset and a little bit of downtown. And that precinct always votes at a higher percentage than others. But one of the others that tends to vote at a higher percentage than others is your home precinct now, Precinct 5.
Right.
And Precinct 5 was previously in the Dylan Fernandez state representative district and has been transferred to David Vieira's current seat that's being
Right.
challenged by Kathy Fox Alfano. It's going to be interesting to see if the presence of Precinct 5 in that seat, because it's David's first election with those voters in there, has any impact on that seat. But hold that thought, because I think we're going to go live to Town Hall. Why don't you introduce them, Doug?
Okay, we're going to go over to Town Hall and check with Debbie and Michael Palmer and see what they can tell us.
Good evening, Troy and Doug. Good to be with you this evening.
Thank you. You too.
You too. Thanks as always, Debbie, for being there, and we appreciate our town clerk, Michael Palmer, being on scene as well.
Absolutely. Michael's here now with us. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Deb. Hi, Troy and Doug. How you doing back there?
Good, thanks.
So it's been a very busy day, and we're working on the results right now. I don't have anything to give you at this moment, but it's uploading to combining the early voting numbers, which we'll be able to get out first to you. And just a word on that, we had almost a 50% of the town's registered voters voted early, and that's a big switch from when your father used to vote. He used to go to the polls and he used to cast a vote, and that was it. Now we give other options for people to vote early by mail and early in person, and people are taking advantage of that. Again, in this election, almost 50% of the people registered in the town of Falmouth chose to vote early. So what that does, though, rather than just turning up on election day, it puts a huge workload onto all the town clerks across the state in order to process those mail-in ballots, sending the application, receiving the application back, recording that we received it back and recording that we received the ballot back, and then ensures that no one is allowed to vote more than once and that everyone's vote is captured correctly. So it really has changed the dynamic of what town clerks' offices do, put a huge burden on the workload. I can't tell you the number of hours that the people in my office, which have been phenomenal. I have to commend them. My staff has really stepped up, but also the election workers in the town of Falmouth. Anytime I needed something done over the last 2 months or so, we had a recount of the earlier in after the primary. We've had early voting. I'll put a message out to my wardens. I'm looking for some election workers, and within 6 hours, I have everyone, all the schedule filled up. It's just I really have to commend them, and they've really stepped up and done a fantastic job. And the staff in my office has been fantastic also.
So with 50% early voting, what are we looking at total for the town?
So this is obviously a guesstimate because we don't have the numbers up until 5 o'clock, and I think we're at 60-something%. But I'm looking at getting up to close to 85% turnout in this election, which, trending for a presidential election, that's about what we would get on presidential elections. Obviously, local elections and primaries and so forth, we don't get that much of a turnout. So. There are a lot of people that come and vote. They haven't voted in a while. So there's a lot of questions: where you vote, how to vote, whether I'm inactive, whether I'm active. And so we've been dealing with that type of thing all day from people that don't normally or on a regular basis vote. So that's been a challenge for us all day long.
So in terms of poll workers, you were talking about the fact that people have really continued to step up, which is amazing. Can you talk a little bit about has the way that our poll workers been trained or security or anything like that changed over the course of the years?
So our poll workers have been around for a while, so a lot of them are very versed in what needs to be done. And we do have a warden's meeting, and I go through all the things that possibly could come up in an election, and then they pass that along to the rest of their poll workers. But one thing that has really changed, and especially this election, is the police department has really stepped up also. I had a meeting with the chief and some of his key officers, and on election day they put an extra supervisor on staff for the entire day. We have a officer at every single precinct to maintain the peace, but they had a supervisor just circling around town the entire day to make sure nothing did happen. And I really have to commend them also. That's fantastic. And the new chief he's just been overwhelmingly supportive. Every time you asked him to do something, he's been there to do it. So he's turning out to be a great addition to the town of Falmouth.
That's great. And I had asked you earlier if you had heard of any issues around town any problems or anything that had come to your attention?
Nothing in particular. I guess we had some people campaigning out in Wacoit and singing Christmas carols, and so we had the officer on duty take a ride out there and just say you can't be doing that. They were actually campaigning within the 150 feet.
I've got a lot of questions.
They were singing. They were happy about it, but it's just something election law doesn't allow within 150 feet to do any electioneering, so we had them disperse. But that's about it. Not really too much did happen. I think that's the presence of the police department at every polling place acts as a deterrent, so we don't get what you hear on TV of the ballot boxes being burning up and stuff. We're very fortunate in the town of Falmouth.
So we can feel proud of our neighbors. So I know you're still working on some numbers for us. We thank you. We'll let you go, and
see what I can get.
we'll see you again soon. And we will go back to the studio.
Thank you very, very much, Debbie. And of course, Michael Palmer has been managing our local elections for more than 20 years, and as he said, does a phenomenal job, and has an amazing staff. And those election workers, many of them are volunteers, and show up just a couple of times a year, or they get paid a very modest wage for a day's work, and they really are demonstrative of how well elections run here in the town of Falmouth. So speaking of the town of Falmouth and its relationship to elections, not only here, but nationwide, we are very, very pleased here tonight on FCTV to have a special guest. Sometimes people are educated here in the Falmouth schools and do amazing work and spend their careers and their lives here in Falmouth. And sometimes people take what's been given to them, the gifts of a Falmouth education and a Falmouth upbringing, and bring those gifts beyond our borders. And tonight, we are very privileged to have someone here on FCTV, someone who was raised and educated here in Falmouth, and went from the streets of Seacoast Shores to the hallowed halls of the West Wing. And my friend and former Falmouth resident, Terry Zuplat, is with us tonight to talk about the election and its national implications, but also the importance of civic involvement. And his recent book, Say It Well, talks about Terry's 8 years in the White House writing speeches for President Barack Obama. And he does that by really giving examples of people from across the nation who learned how to say it well. And his national book tour recently had a stop right here in Falmouth, Doug. And so it is my pleasure to welcome live here on FCTV one of the favorite sons of Falmouth, Terry Zuplat. Terry, welcome.
Hey there, Troy. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight. We are very thrilled to have you here. And I know your mom is watching because I saw her at the movie theater the other night and told her to make sure that she's watching this. And so Terry's mom and dad, Peggy and Stash Zuplat, still live here in Falmouth, and I'm sure they're very proud of their son. So Doug will certainly give you some time to ask for questions. But Terry, let's relate tonight's discussion about this election to the work not only that you did in the White House, but in your recent book, where you talk about finding ways to say it well, because saying things well was not always present during this election.
Yeah, there's a reason that I did not feature politicians as much in this book. This is a book about how all of us can sort of communicate with more sort of civility and empathy and honesty. As citizens, as neighbors, as co-workers, and as fellow community members. And sadly, not always, particularly at the national level, our national leaders aren't always the greatest model for that. So I should just point out, you mentioned my folks. I think my mom spent most of the day, pretty much all day at Precinct 4 as a poll worker. So kind of all comes full circle.
And that is, I'm sure, Doug, Terry's mom, Peggy's been a poll worker.
Yes.
And was a public servant for many, many years at the Falmouth Public Library. And so just a great example of a Falmouth family really giving back.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point you make about the change in the tone and what I consider about a lack of civility. And it's really, the leadership, it starts at the top. And you know, when we're in a position as select board members, we got to be careful how we speak and the tone that we set. And it goes the same for the governor and the same for the president. We all, you know, the kids look up to us, and they have to, you know, set an example. So I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. What's interesting to me is that, you know, in poll after poll, so overwhelming majorities of the American people across parties, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, you know, everybody always agrees. You know, we need to just communicate with more civility. We could tone the rhetoric down. That doesn't mean anyone has to necessarily change their positions, but you know, find better ways to communicate what we believe, recognizing that, you know, there are people, our neighbors, our family members who don't see the world the same way we do. So, but yet, despite those polls, you know, maybe things calm down for a minute and then everyone goes immediately back to the way things were. They start posting the worst sorts of things on social media, tweeting the worst sorts of things. So one of the things in the book is I try to actually offer specific ways that all of us can kind of, you know, bring more civility to our discussions. And again, everywhere from our workplaces to our neighborhoods to our town hall meetings.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of neighborhoods and town hall meetings, Terry, I had the pleasure of being at your book event in Woods Hole just last month when you were here on your national book tour. You talked about how your Falmouth experience and how growing up here and being a student at Falmouth High, in fact, several of your teachers were there at the book launch. But talk to us, for the folks that weren't able to make that, about how your Falmouth experience really informed your ability to write speeches for the leader of the free world.
Sure. Well, actually, I should say that that was at the Falmouth Forum. So anyone can go online to the website, the MBL Falmouth Forum. The video of the event is there. I'm so glad they recorded, because it really was a sort of a wonderful moment of sort of life coming full circle. You know, so many of my classmates from Falmouth were there, teachers, parents, neighbors. But yeah, I mean, in Falmouth, you know, I think that very much so, Falmouth High School in particular, and all those schools of Falmouth prepared me for the career that I had. You know, I remember participating in essay contests in elementary school and middle school. And in high school, we had, I wasn't on the student newspaper, I was on the student TV program. And so Barbara Stevens and, you know, and Mr. Weiner and Barry Sadoff were all instrumental in helping me kind of learn to write a script, how to write for the ear, how to write for delivery. And then, you know, I've always loved history and politics and government. And so, you know, great teachers like Frederick Grunin and Jim O'Brien and so many others. And so, yeah, I mean, we were blessed to have, you know, award-winning writing program and teachers and staff who really cared for us. And you know, I don't think I'd be where I am today without that.
Certainly. And also here in Falmouth, I don't know if it's just Falmouth, because I really only know Falmouth really well. We have a certain level of civility where we were talking earlier about, you know, town meeting, and now we used to have to stand for our vote to be recognized. So the person next to you stands for their vote, and then you stand for yours. Afterwards, you still share candy and whatnot you have that you brought, and you know, there's no hard feelings. It's you vote your conscience, and then you carry on.
Yeah, I mean, what a great tradition, right? I mean, I think what's interesting when you describe that is that you see each other, right? You're truly next to each other, and then when the vote is over, you're still sitting next to each other.
Right.
The lesson there is that, you know, we're neighbors and we have to live and work together. I think part of the problem, particularly at the national level and, you know, social media, right, is that, you know, anyone can just sort of blast anything off and tear somebody down, and you know, you're ripping into people that you've never met and will never meet, and so you assume the worst possible motives about them. You attribute the worst of intentions to them. So Falmouth is really fortunate, right, that you have a, you know, I know it can get intense. I've been to some of them. I was back when I was at FHS. Our student government was modeled after the town meeting system. It was a way of the Falmouth schools teaching us how our own community worked. And so, you know, I know things can get heated, and I know things can get intense. But then, you know, when it's all over, yeah, you're neighbors, and you've got to live with each other. And you know, but most of the country doesn't function that way. We take that for granted in Falmouth and Massachusetts and New England. where the town hall meeting format is so common, and there's such a rich tradition of that. I wish more places around the country did that. I think it would force people to come face to face more with their neighbors and realize that, they're not these caricatures that we so often make them out, particularly on social media.
Very true.
Yeah, before I came here to FCTV tonight, Terry, I was actually the speaker at the Falmouth Rotary Club, and the topic of my talk was the future of democracy. And I tried to relate that here to Falmouth, but one of the things I talked about was The Economist does an index every year of democracies around the world. And the United States is 29th in the Democratic Index. And so there are 28 other countries who have an index that's higher than the United States. And a lot of that decline in the Democratic Index for the United States is based on what's happened in the last several years. And you just described part of it. It's the degradation of our discourse and the emergence of social media, but it's also the system itself with some antiquated components like the Electoral College and like disproportionate representation in the Senate. And we're at a real inflection point in our democracy. And I know we're here to talk about Falmouth, but those issues are relative to here in Falmouth because they're part of our everyday lives. Can you talk about what you observed at the epicenter of politics and government in the White House about this democratic experience of ours?
Yeah, I mean, this is something. So I was as a speechwriter for President Obama in the White House for the 8 years that he was president. I mean, this became a huge topic and a huge theme of our discussions, of the president's speeches, of the last campaign. Those sort of last 2 years that we were in the White House, we're very much aware of, what was going on the campaign trail. And, it's fascinating. And so this became a huge theme that President Obama would talk about, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so he would do that because he wanted people around the world to know that this thing called democracy doesn't just sustain itself. It just doesn't go on forever. It takes every generation has to step up and defend it and sustain it and nourish it. And so as he's over there, all over the world, encouraging other countries to do the hard work of democracy, we were doing it again in the United States in a way that maybe we hadn't expected for a lot of us in our lifetimes. I don't think many of us, so you got the TV on in the background, the exit polls are starting to come in from places like Georgia and Pennsylvania. And one of the things that just blew my mind a few minutes ago was that, when you ask people, what's the number one issue on your mind right now? For pretty much the entire campaign, the economy has been by far the top issue. 60-something% of the people say the economy is the top issue for them, followed by maybe immigration, followed maybe by abortion, reproductive freedom, and then healthcare. Tonight in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvanians are telling the pollsters that their number one issue is democracy. So really, I think something has really taken hold in the last few weeks where I think, a lot of people don't focus on elections. Those of us, you all do, I do. But, most Americans are busy and they don't focus on it. Many don't focus on it till the very end, the last few weeks or days. So to hear that so many people in Pennsylvania now think democracy is the number one issue facing their country, even as they have, difficult time paying their bills and covering health care, I think is remarkable. And so we'll see if that proves to be true all across the country.
We often say that we believe that the United States has the greatest democracy in the world. It may have the largest, but I'm not sure we're doing it as well as we could. The customer I talked to today who travels the world with his business told me the country that he was in last week, they have a law in their country that when you pay for your political advertising and you go on television, you can only talk about yourself and what you're going to do, what your policies are. You can't talk about the other person or any other person. You just talk about what you're going to do. And it might be time to have something like that here because we've got this negativity that's happening where all we do is talk negatively about the other opponent and everyone gets depressed because it's like, is everybody bad? Is there anybody doing anything good? So I don't know. I hope we can consider some kind of new rules for that kind of decorum.
think one of the best things that happened tonight will be I think the commercials have stopped. I live here in Virginia. We get absolutely, we're not really a swing state, but we do get a lot of ads, and man, it's been just nonstop. I'm sure it has, particularly in any Boston media markets for New Hampshire, but yeah, it's pretty brutal. And again, then you wonder why so many people don't vote. I mean, in 2020, I think it was about a third of the eligible voters. On one hand, we had the highest turnout, I think, in maybe a century. So pat on our back, America. But then it turns out that highest turnout in more than a century was 60-something%. So roughly a third of folks still didn't vote. I mean, so many folks are just turned off by it. And, I think that's going to be one of the big challenges for the decades to come is how do you keep people engaged, particularly young people. Not some of the reports we're seeing tonight that there's, huge turnout among young people and college students and in some of the areas around the universities in Pennsylvania. I mean, we'll see if that holds up. But when no one should have to wait 4 hours in line to vote, but the fact that a young college student is willing to wait 4 hours in line to vote does show a level of commitment that, again, shouldn't take 4 hours, but it gives me hope that the young people are willing to do that.
Yeah.
That gives me great hope to hear what you said about the exit polling. You'll be happy to know, Terry, here in your hometown of Falmouth, we're projecting an 85% turnout in today's election. Full 50% of whom voted early, either by mail or in person. So democracy is alive and well here in Falmouth, and that's a good sign. And I'm thrilled to hear you say that those exit polls indicate that people are aware that democracy is at stake here. That's very important, because that Democratic Index that we talked about, no one would accuse The Economist of being a left-leaning organization. And so for them to have that objective analysis of democracies, Doug, and for us to be 29th among nations in the world shows just how fragile this system of ours is.
Yeah, we gotta defend it. We gotta sustain it. Again, it doesn't. And we've seen there have been all sorts of examples throughout history of robust democracies ending and becoming undemocratic and slipping into all sorts of isms, and there's nothing inevitable about it, and there's not. And as much as we'd like to think that Americans in the United States are somehow immune or inoculated from the great forces of history, I mean, it's just not true. There's no country that can wall itself off from the forces of history. So yeah, this is something, and so that's. I'm just curious that the 85%, is that a record or in Falmouth turnout 85%?
It's on the high end of normal. Thankfully, our town clerk, Mike Palmer, has said that usually 80% for a presidential election is about normal. So 85 is a little more robust than what we normally see.
Right.
But it's a good harbinger, I think, of things to come in the status of democracy here in Falmouth. Here's a lighthearted question for you.
Sure.
So to shift us from the future of democracy and as Benjamin Franklin said, if we can keep it, share with us your best lighthearted memory from your time as moderator of the Falmouth High Town Meeting.
Oh my God. Well, the beauty of it, right, was that the students could put any, I think we called them articles, right? Articles on we had a warrant committee, and then we would debate the issue, and and we took this all the way to our town meeting, and we decided that someone had the idea that there should be contraceptives for guys in all the bathrooms, and so this just tore the school apart for weeks as this was debated, and then ultimately dealt with at the student town meeting. I think we overwhelmingly voted yes, and then the administration quickly shot it down. So, so that's democracy. So there was. I mean, this is like 1990. I don't know. Maybe that's what happens now. I don't know. But in 1990, 95, that was a pretty bold and controversial thing. I don't know, maybe it's not anymore. But
Oh, it's not, but I remember that well because I was a few years ahead of you at Falmouth High, and by the time that came up, I was actually on the select board here in Falmouth.
Oh, good. So you killed it.
and-
There we go. So so imagine having, we were, 18-year-old kids
Yeah.
trying to navigate a town hall meeting format discussion about, it was a serious issue, and the students had really strong views on it on all sides. And so, but again, what a great experience that was to really, you have to think through as young people, as again, freshmen to seniors, grappling with a really hard topic for which there was no easy answer. And I still remember that. I bet you a lot of the folks, anybody who was there at that time remembers it, because it was a big issue for us. And I would just say, I don't know how many young people are watching here, but we're seeing again tonight just what I think sometimes people get demoralized, or they get cynical. They think their voice doesn't matter. They just, in a country of 300 million people, what can I possibly do? Well, tonight all over the country, in some of these races are going to come down to, 1 or 2 votes per precinct. Some of the races are going to come down to votes in the single digits. So it really matters. And, if you're interested in politics and government and history like I was at Falmouth High School, there's so many opportunities to play a role, in your town, whether it's Falmouth or state, Massachusetts, or nationally. And I was very lucky to be able to work for several years, at the White House and be able to take what I learned in Falmouth and apply it nationally.
Yeah. It's been encouraging to see some young people in Falmouth getting involved, coming to the select board meetings and getting on committees and getting active. My last year in high school, I actually went to Oliver Ames High School, and I participated in the Hockomock Senate. And we all sponsor a bill, and we try to get it through our own school to bring it to the competition with the other schools. So I sponsored a bill for breaking up the Bell Telephone Company. And my own classmates said, that'll never pass, forget it. It didn't even make it to the competition. But now look how many phone companies we have.
Well, so you were a visionary. You were prescient, Doug.
Right.
So
Very, very, very prescient.
Terry Zuplat, what a thrill to have you here. Thank you for taking the time out. Speechwriter for 8 years for President Barack
got
Obama.
a lot of questions about
Author of
automatic
Say
voter
It Well.
registration. That's when you go to the
book.
registry.
I will say, this is not a commercial news station, so we can say that you've published this book, and you're still taking time to go around the country to speak to young people. I know just this week you gave away 25 books to a charitable organization. So we really appreciate your commitment to democracy, your commitment to your hometown of Falmouth. Terry Zuplat, thank you for joining us here tonight, live election coverage, and we wish you the best.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
Take care.
Have a great evening.
All right, well, that was
Very enlightening.
Terry Zuplat, speechwriter for President Barack Obama, talking about democracy. I'm still, as Terry was, just floored that, Doug, one of the primary issues in the exit polling for people coming out was democracy itself. And that is at the same time, I think, encouraging, but also jarring that it shows how fragile our government is, and the fact that people are concerned about democracy itself.
In a sense, it shows how strong it is, because people are paying attention and do realize what's going on. So I'm encouraged.
So that really gives us the opportunity, I think, to talk for a little bit about the national mood and what we've seen in the two presidential candidates, two very different styles, two very different people with very different experiences. But in the case of the former President Trump, a dark, sort of foreboding vision of our country and where it's headed, and the vice president, a more hopeful and joyful look. And that filters down to our everyday conversations. You spend time in the coffee shops and breakfast places here in Falmouth, as I do, and know that we have a mix of both of those outlooks here in Falmouth. And as an elected official who's responsive to voters every day, how do you deal with that? And the pressures of the different ways that people view their government, both nationally and locally.
You know, we're living in an age where you can choose your news. You can choose whatever source you want, and they're going to tell you what you want to hear. So it's up to us to seek out what we don't want to hear and make sure we're listening to both sides. It's the only way we're going to be informed.
Interesting. And so when we look at that, just even in the primary race for the state Senate seat, the two candidates there, State Representative Matt Muratori, who of course was successful, and his challenger, Carrie McRae. So within the Republican Party in that primary, there were two very different outlooks. Even on the sanctity of the election, you know, we had Michael Palmer here, who's been our town clerk, as I said, for 20 years, and he knows, and I actually was a warden for him in one of the precincts for several years. So I have firsthand experience about not only how accurate those machines are, but how dedicated those election workers are, and how free and fair our elections are here in Falmouth. But one of those candidates in that race even called the election process, in this case in Plymouth, into question.
Yeah.
You know, as an elected official, how do you combat that sort of misinformation?
Well, it's tough because, like I said earlier, it starts at the top, and she's seen examples of others with that type of stubborn refusal to face the facts and face the truth and just keep fighting and fighting and clawing at any possible chance. So it's unfortunate. You know, I really used to really be so appreciative of candidates when they'd see the early results and put a handshake out and offer congratulations. I hope that comes back. You know, the national tone and the numbers that are coming out, it's interesting how it might affect, like, Dave Vieira's seat, because Dave is a Republican, but living in a state which has a lot more Democrats. I think it has more independents than anything, but I'm sure there's a lot more Democrats. So now we got, some people say it's a blue wave, and I see, I go to some of the events and I hear people say, you got to vote the whole ticket. I don't ever do that. I vote for what I see the person doing, the job that they're doing. I hope more people would do that than just vote the party and party line, because it's unfortunate when a person's doing a good job but maybe swept away with, you know, the enthusiasm of other candidates in the region. So we'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting.
So in line with what you were just talking about, and in line with our discussion on the sanctity of elections and the hard work of local election officials, we do have a package for you that was recorded earlier today, where we were out in the field talking to people about just that. So let's go to that tape.
I've got a lot of questions about automatic voter registration. That's when you go to the registry of motor vehicles and they're saying illegal aliens are getting driver's license and they're automatically voted. They're automatically being registered to vote. That is far from the truth. So when you go to the registry of motor vehicles to update your license, you must provide the RMV with either a passport, a U.S. birth certificate, or U.S. naturalization papers. And if you don't, you will not be registered to vote. So if an illegal alien gets a driver's license, it's not being sent to us to register them to vote. In fact, if they go online and try to, now that they've got their driver's license, the online registering won't allow them to do that either. So they would have to come in person and register to vote. So when they register to vote, they can check off U.S. citizen, over 18, fill it all out, but then they're either putting their driver's license down or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And if that would kick it out, if they don't have their driver's license said they're not a U.S. citizen, that would kick out that registration and not allow us to register them to vote. So the myth that illegal aliens are registered to vote is that a myth?
There's about 28,000 registered voters in the town, and there's 9 precincts. We have, each precinct has about slightly under 3,000 voters. We'll be issued 1,600 ballots at the beginning of the day, and then others will come in during the day. Let's say we have 1,600 ballots to start with. We run out about 6 o'clock at night, get another 200, so we have 1,800 ballots, maybe another 150 ballots will be turned into us that were early votes on it. At the end of the night, we have to make sure that when we lock up those ballots, we record in the clerk's book exactly how many ballots we've had, and then you have to reconcile with what we've given. The other thing we're responsible for is the security of those ballots. If we have this brief meeting at the beginning of the day, talking about the what ifs. Could there be a fire? Other instances could be, and the first duty we have is to make sure the poll workers are safe, the voters are safe, and then the ballots are safe. So we have the police officers assigned to us. You have to make sure that the ballot, and that he wheels that out, and then he secures the remaining ballots. My family's always sort of celebrated Election Day. They go vote, they go out and have lunch. You know, so it's an event, and we kind of honor that.
And we're back here live and FCTV. I'm Troy Clarkson, and this is Doug Brown with live election coverage tonight. So, Doug, that was an important talk given by the town clerk, obviously before today, but then interviewing the Precinct 1 captain about the election process here in Falmouth and the work that really goes behind the scenes for many weeks before an election to make sure the elections here in Falmouth are secure.
Absolutely, and you know, that's the same thing we've been hearing from across the whole country. The clerks in Georgia, everywhere. For years now, we've been uncovering and searching to see if there's any problems, and maybe they find something somewhere, but I mean, the vast majority have found no real problems, and all the court challenges have come to nothing. So, I mean, I feel pretty confident in our voting system. I hope other people do too.
Absolutely, and we will take you to Town Hall with live results from those early voting results and any other results as soon as they're available. So we may break in through a discussion to get you to live to Town Hall as soon as we can. But Doug, while we're waiting for that, we did have several other races on the ballot that we haven't talked about. Mm-hmm. Of course, the presidential race we talked a little bit about, but we do have several races with local implications, but that are statewide or regional races, including Senator Elizabeth Warren is up for re-election. Our Congressman Bill Keating is up for re-election. Both of those incumbents are challenged. Mm-hmm. I would say the conventional wisdom is that the challengers didn't have a great chance. Both the polling data and I think experience here in Massachusetts, which as you stated are heavily Democratic, so mm-hmm. It was a tough climb for either of those challengers to beat an incumbent. I will say, to offer commentary, that I think both Senator Warren and Congressman Keating are very hardworking, successful legislators that do a great job and haven't really given the voters a reason not to return them because they've both served us very, very well. A lesser known but very important office of governor's counselor is on the ballot, and our incumbent Joe Ferreira is being challenged by Kristen Condon. The Governor's Council, of course, is one of the oldest elected bodies in the Commonwealth, mm-hmm. And they approve judges and notaries and clerk magistrates, and so they perform a very important function, right. But aren't as well known as some of the other offices. So let's just talk a little bit about those races.
Well, I would just say that it's always good to have competition because it keeps you on your toes and it keeps you talking about what you're going to do and what you have done, and keeps you honest. So I'm glad there's competition. Also, outside of our district, but I know Stephen Exaros is running for re-election against the clerk from the Assembly, the County Assembly, Owen Fletcher. And Owen was told by a lot of folks that you're really probably not going to win this race. And he said he just wanted to run because it doesn't seem right to just have people running unopposed, because there's not a challenge for them to really take up the challenge of explaining what you're going to do. And so, credit to him for that. And it's the same with all of them. I mean, when I run for select board, if I don't have a competition, it's a little boring. It's nice to have competition. It's nice to get out there and talk about what we're going to do and what we have done and what our experience is. It keeps us sharp.
And, well, speaking of that, then, since you brought it up, you're up for re-election in May, right?
I am.
So It's, I think there's two of you, right?
Yeah,
Five-member
myself
board,
and
so
Scott Zelinski will also be up for re-election.
2, 2, and 1 as it goes.
Right.
And, all right, so we will see. I will be here on election night in May, and so we'll see you here in the studio as a candidate that night.
All right.
And who knows if you'll have opposition or not, but.
Well,
Okay, so
All
here
right.
we go, folks. We're going to go live back to Town Hall with early voting results. Again, FCTV CEO Debbie Rogers and our veteran town clerk Michael Palmer are there, and we look forward to hearing those early results.
Our town clerk here with some early results.
I'm back. Unfortunately, when you upload 12,700 votes, it takes a lot longer to upload than when you normally upload 5,000 votes. So it looks like the top of the ticket, Harris had almost a 3-to-1 advantage, 8,700 to 3,600 over Trump. Probably not unexpected. A little bit further down the ballot, some of our local officials. David Vieira had approximately a 600 vote lead. These are early voting results also, so it's not including the whole town. So just early voting, which was 12,743 votes were cast. David Vieira had 4,100, and Kathleen Alfano had 3,500. So
Wow.
about 500, 600 votes he won that by. In the county commissioner race, it looks like Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons at least doubled the other, the Ron Beatty and Cynthia Steed on those races. So, what was the other one was for
State Senate.
Dylan Fernandez. Looked like he was almost a 3-to-1 winner over Moratori. So he had 8,500 and Moratori had 3,500 in
Right,
the town of Falmouth. So these are just early voting results
Right, and they were
that were
asking-
pre-tabulated.
They were asking about the state senate numbers as well. View those again.
Those are just, that was Dylan Fernandez and Moratori. So Dylan had 8540 and Moratori had 3560. So almost 3-to-1, a little bit less than 3-to-1 margin. He won that. And these are, again, I'm not saying he won because you have election day results, and that's a pretty big district too. So, Moratori is from Plymouth, which is the largest town in the district. So it'd be interesting to see where they are there, and that will determine how that race comes out. But we're working on, looks like my assistant town clerk just came back with the last set of memory cards from our precincts, and we'll upload them and get results, hopefully very shortly. So
Great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing from you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us. So we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Debbie, thank you very much. So some very interesting results to talk about here, Doug. So for those local races that people are following and looking to follow, the Dylan Fernandez Matt Muratori Senate race, these are early voting only, so they're not all of the numbers, but Dylan Fernandez with a commanding, significant, almost certainly more than double, almost 3-to-1 margin of approximately 8,500 votes to Matt Muratori's 3,500. Doug, I think that's somewhat expected. Honestly, I've been observing campaigns around here for 30 years, and I don't know that I've seen a candidate work harder than I've seen Dylan Fernandez work in the last several weeks. They knocked on tens of thousands of doors, and this is his home base, so you expected a strong result. But earlier in the show, you talked about the fact that Representative Muratori has family in Falmouth, and you thought maybe there would be a stronger showing. But that's, through any estimation, a pretty good trouncing.
Sure. Well, Dylan's a hard worker, not just for the last few weeks, but throughout the whole time he's been working. He's always getting stuff done. He brings more money to the district than anybody I can remember. So,
and let's talk about the other hotly contested race, that is incumbent David Vieira being challenged by Kathy Fox Alfano from Bourne. I don't know that I expected that to be this close. And David needed a very strong showing here in Falmouth. The other towns in the district, of course, Mashpee and Bourne. So that race is closer than perhaps we anticipated it would be.
well, that's what I was mentioning earlier, that blue wave effect where Dave's a Republican in a a Democratic area.
And it'll be interesting to parse those numbers by precinct, as we talked about before, if Precinct 5 was a factor in that traditionally votes fairly Democratic, and whether or not the addition of that precinct to this seat will have an impact on that race.
And also the fact that it's a presidential race, it changes the dynamic, brings out a lot more voters.
Oh, it sure does.
So if we were in between presidential races, because they run every 2 years, I think those numbers would be pretty different.
So also in early voting, we haven't talked about this race yet, Doug, but there are two incumbent county commissioners, Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons, being challenged, both Democrats being challenged by two Republicans, Ron Beatty and Cynthia Stead. What I believe I heard the town clerk say was that approximately a 2-to-1 margin. You would expect that. I think both Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons tend to do very well in Falmouth. Cynthia Stead is a mid-Cape, well-known Republican who I'm guessing is going to perform much stronger on the mid-Cape. Ron Beatty, of course, a very colorful elected official who previously served as a county commissioner and previously served in another way as well. So that race will be interesting to continue to watch. But those results not surprising, given the electoral history of both Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons here in Falmouth.
I agree with that. That's another case where the incumbent has such a huge advantage, but they're both hard workers too. You know, Mark Forrest is very active in government, not just as a county commissioner, but he's a select board member in his own town. He's very active with the Mass Municipal Association. He keeps the Cape and Islands municipal leaders very well informed as the vice president. He's always feeding us feedback from MMA. So I'm not surprised at all that Mark is very successful, and Sheila too is very active and very popular in her district.
So let's flip back to that Senate race, because I think that's probably the most closely watched, and that seat has been, in the last several years, both Republican and Democrat. And so for those folks watching at home that may not be familiar with the whole seat, it is Falmouth, Mashpee, Sandwich, Bourne,
Kingston?
and then Plymouth, Kingston. I think Pembroke is still part of the district. I should have had a district map, and it extends into Plymouth County a little bit more. And so it's a very varied district. They're tied together, I suppose, by water. But you know, the Cape towns certainly have different interests than the towns off Cape. And because you have two candidates, one from Plymouth and one from Falmouth, that are in the population centers of this district, the conventional wisdom going into the race was that it was a very competitive race. Interestingly enough, as I watched the campaigns unfold, I didn't see the presence of Matt Muratori down here in Falmouth as much as I thought I would.
Well, I saw him a few times down here. I saw him at the East Falmouth Village Association hosted a candidates forum at the Navigator. I saw him there. I saw him at the Mashpee Rotary on Sunday. He was out there with his supporters. So he's been active in the town.
Excellent. So we will continue to bring you results. We'll go back to Town Hall one more time before we conclude this show. As Town Clerk Michael Palmer said, what we gave you, those results, let me read through those once more, but we'll go back with the full Falmouth results in just a few minutes. But early voting results, Dylan Fernandez over Matt Muratori in the Senate race, approximately 8,500 to 3,500. David Vieira in the state representative race here in Falmouth, approximately 4,100 votes to Kathy Fox Alfano's 3,500. And at the top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris, about 8,700 votes to former President Donald Trump's 3,600 votes. And in the county commissioner's race, incumbents Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons far out ahead of the two challengers, Cynthia Stead and Ron Beatty. So in addition to those hotly contested races, Massachusetts-wide, there were 5 ballot questions, and of course here in the Cape, there was a 6th question. Let's talk about those ballot questions, because when we go back to Town Hall, we'll have the results of those questions as well. Do you want to run us through those 5 questions real quick? or
Well,
the 6?
the question 1 was the state auditor was requesting permission to audit the Mass legislature. Many experts in government have said that that's just not constitutional to have a section of government auditing another section of government. The current practice is that they hire professional auditing firms that audit the legislature, and a lot of people feel like if question 1 passes, it's not going to really be enacted because it's not constitutional. We'll see how that rolls out. I mean, if they do vote yes on that, then they'll have to determine whether or not that's constitutionally allowable. MCAS, that's an interesting one. It's apparently a very close race. Question 2 would be an effort to drop the high school exit exam requirement for graduating high school. I was curious about whether or not schools would continue to use the MCAS to get a regional understanding of how the schools are doing. It's my understanding that the MCAS was started, I think it was 1992, I'm not really sure, but I think that's what it was. And the idea was that some schools seemed to be doing much better than others, but they really didn't know. So they developed a statewide test to get an idea of how the schools were performing so that underperforming schools could be identified and maybe get some more resources their way or help them in some other way. So personally, I was not in favor of removing the requirement because I felt like we were talking about just getting rid of the test completely. And somebody else pointed out to me that you could still keep the test but not make it a requirement. And then you're still getting your regional understanding of how your schools are doing, but not ruining a kid's life because he's not a good test taker. So I couldn't get a clear answer as to whether or not they would continue to use the MCAS. Maybe that'll be cleared up and we'll make sure that we understand that if it comes back, if it doesn't pass. If it passes, they'll have to figure out what they want to do. Number 3, ride-hailing unions, how question 3 aims to allow Uber and Lyft drivers to unionize. It just seems like, why not give them the opportunity? To me, I mean, what's the harm in giving them permission? Doesn't mean they're going to do it. They're not mandated to do it. That's my take. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think I took the same position as you did. If the drivers want to have the ability to unionize, as someone who's generally pretty pro-labor, then they certainly should have that ability. Let me just weigh in the early. I now have the printed early voting results sent to us by FCTV CEO Debra, and on question 3, very close in voting here, in early voting only in Falmouth. Yes on that was 5,949, and no was 5,911. So when Terry Zuplat was talking about the fact that every vote counts, here you see it. On questions 1 and 2, just to go back to that, in question 1 here in Falmouth, the yeses were an overwhelming victory. So that initiative, championed by Auditor Diana DeZoglio, garnered 8,250 votes to 3,513 noes. So a pretty resounding victory here in Falmouth for question 1. On question 2, the yeses were 65-62, and the noes were 56-61. So you see a wide variance, Doug, in those numbers from question to question. So clearly Falmouth voters did their homework, and clearly they went into the voting booth through the early voting, either by mail or in person, understanding those questions and taking a pretty clear position. And you can explain to us the other 3, but before you do, let me just give you the results. Doug will talk about these in a minute, but question 4 would legalize psychedelic drugs for therapeutic use in Massachusetts. Pretty resounding no. The yeses were 44-79 and the yeses 76-20. Question 5, also pretty widely discussed and debated. An overwhelming victory for the no folks here on that one. In Falmouth, early voting only, yeses at 4,077, noes at 8,095. And question 6, which was a local option only here in Barnstable County, which dealt with the power of the Assembly of Delegates to impact budgets, the yeses were 47-71 and the noes 5,437. Some of those results could change when the day of voting numbers were tallied in, but some of them, I think, the victories were pretty clear. And although the numbers will change, the result will likely not change because some of those were so different in their results.
Right. So that was a no on 4, early indication.
Early voting only, a pretty resounding no on 4, yeah. And again, a pretty resounding no on 5, and a pretty close one, but a no on 6 as well.
And so question 4, the psychedelics, I don't think that was maybe fully thought through. It didn't seem to be clear enough how that would be implemented. The fact that people could just now grow these things, and who knows how that will be controlled or if it'll be controlled. And it's pretty powerful drugs, I imagine. So I think that's why people were hesitant to just say, sure, do whatever you want on that one. Tipped wages, question 5. Interesting that's, I'm not surprised that one is a no. I just can't imagine who came up with that idea to butt into the restaurant industry. And every restaurant worker I talked to and every restaurant owner I talked to, I didn't hear a single one say that they thought it was a good idea. They even seemed a little angry about it, as if somebody was getting into their business. Number 6, the Barnstable County Charter. I think a lot of people didn't really understand what that was about because it's kind of a unique thing. I think a lot of folks don't really pay attention to county government. I saw Eric Turkington did an article pointing out that it was his opinion that it would have been better to be handled in the charter process, which I think is only a year away. So the Assembly can have another try at doing it that way. Maybe that will be a better process. Their aim was to try to make it more clear in the county charter what their role with regard to finance was. They feel like it's not clear. There's a lot of time they spend arguing and debating between the commissioners and the Assembly. They both have legal representation working on it often. Each time there's an ordinance about finance, if they're not in agreement, they end up going to the lawyers to see who's right. So this will likely come back next year in the charter discussion.
Okay, and thank you for that thorough discussion of the ballot questions. We are ready to go back to Town Hall with Deb Rogers and Michael Palmer with some final results. Debbie, thank you so much, as always, for being there and providing on-the-spot results for our viewers at home. Let's talk about the final results.
And thank you for being at the studio. We have some unofficial results, and Michael Palmer's back with us to give those now.
Yeah, hi, how you doing? We didn't quite get the 85% I was hoping for. Actually, we were way off. We were 75%, but still, that's quite a bit of a turnout for the town. We had 21,806 people vote out of the 28,849 registered voters. So it's a huge turnout, and relatively speaking, from some of our other elections, local elections, we're only getting 10, 15, 20% sometimes. So for a presidential, you normally get more people out to vote, and a lot of people that don't vote a lot do come out to vote. They vote every 4 years for the president. So that 75% was a good amount, was a good turnout. Unfortunately, it wasn't the 85% that I was hoping for. So in the town, and these are unofficial, there still are a couple of things that have to be calculated into this. One would be any hand-counted ballots at the precinct, any overseas and military votes that came in. We had about 250 of those, and we're in the process of adding them in. Tomorrow morning we'll update these results, but they're only 250, so not a lot of impact we'll have on any of these results. For president, Harris took the town of Falmouth with 13,391 to Trump's 7,713. So pretty much as expected in the town of Falmouth. Rhoda carried the town of Falmouth. So some of our local races, Dylan Fernandez was a 2-to-1 margin over Moratori, roughly. And again, he's in a big district, so there's still Plymouth to come in. So, and that's where Moratori is from. So he still holds almost a 7,000 vote lead there. But a lot of other towns involved in that district. So we'll see how that pans out. In the state rep race, just in the town of Falmouth, obviously the district Carrie's born in Sandwich precincts also. David Vieira had 8119, and Alfano had 5,557. So roughly a 2,500 point lead there. Still not going to be impacted by just the 250 Uwakava voters. So the other race down the line were for county commissioners, and I think the two Democrats, Mark Forrest and Sheila Lyons, had double what Ron Beatty and Cynthia Steed had. That's just real quickly going through the local results in the top of the ballot. So,
Thank you. Debbie, could...
You have the results here, and we'll be getting them out to everybody, but...
Troy's got a
Thank you.
question. Go ahead, Troy.
You did give general results on the Senate, but...
Congratulate Troy on his doctor's degree, so congratulations, Troy.
So, Troy, I'm not sure if you heard that.
Thank you. Yes, I did.
Dr. Troy. And you had a question for Michael?
Yeah, so you did give us general results on the Senate race, but not the specific numbers. Could you provide those?
On the Senate?
On the Senate.
Specific,
Yeah.
so it was Dylan Fernandez, 13,472. And Matthew Moratori, 7,232.
Okay.
That's a big district, though, so there's lots of votes to come in for that one. And again,
Right.
Moratori is from Plymouth, which is the biggest town in the in that district. So that's still a tight race there. We'll see what happens when we combine the results from the other towns.
Excellent.
If you have time, maybe we could go over, or I could give them a little bit of information on the questions. I'm going to give this to our producer. So
Okay, I haven't looked at these at all, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do that. Now.
I'll do that, and then I'll get some copies of this over. And
Okay.
thank you again.
Thanks a lot. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
Busiest man in Falmouth here tonight. So let me just get in here a little bit. So on the, I don't think he got into the county commissioner. We have Mark Forrest with 11,252 votes total. Sheila Lyons with 11,183 votes. Ronald Beatty, 6,881 votes. And Cynthia Steed, 5,161 votes. Dan Gesson ran unopposed. Just going to flip this over. It just came out of the printer here. And we will make sure we get pictures over to you. Mary Cook ran unopposed on the Regional School Committee, Upper Cape Bourne. She received 13,756 votes. Mary Ann Smith, 14,240 votes, also unopposed, or only person running. Might have been one seat, I'm not sure. Let me skip down here because we're getting into Wareham and Sandwich. On question 1, yes, 14,038. No on question 1, 6,135. On question 2, yes, 11,369. And the noes, 9,674. On question 3, the yes votes, 9,709. And the no votes, 10,659. On question 4, the yes votes, 8,289, and the no votes, 12,536. On question 5, the yes votes, 5,886, and the no votes, 15,053. And finally, on question 6, the yes votes, 8,166, and the no votes, 9,436. And that's what we have for the unofficial Falmouth results from Town Hall.
Thank you, as always, Debbie, for being there with those results. It'll be very interesting to see how those ballot question results here in Falmouth translate to statewide, but certainly with questions like 1 and 5 that were probably the two most hotly debated, although the MCAS question was significantly debated as well. But as I said before, our voters clearly did their homework because those were significant margins. A yes on question 1 to be able to audit the legislature, and a no on 5 on the tipped workers. And so Falmouth voters do their homework, and they came ready today to have their opinions known, Debbie.
It'll be interesting to see what the percentage of turnout is in the other towns, especially in
Absolutely.
Plymouth.
Right. All right. Well, once again, Debbie, thank you. We thank you very much for always being there and providing those results to us. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you. See you back at the studio.
So there you have it, Falmouth. Some interesting results, and as always, we're thrilled to bring you those live results right out of the town clerk's office here at FCTV. And Doug, before we close it out, anything that stands out to you amongst these results, or was it as expected?
Not too surprising. I'm a little surprised at how well Kathy Alfano did. But then again, there's the impact of the presidential race. So I hope David does well in the other districts. I think he's done a good job.
So, and of course, just to wrap up those, we'll give you those results one more time. These are Falmouth only, but they are unofficial but final results. In the Senate race, Representative Dylan Fernandez, 13,472. Representative Matt Muratori, 7,232. And incumbent State Representative David Vieira, 8,119. And challenger Kathy Fox Alfano, 5,557. So pretty wide margins for the incumbent in the state rep race and for the Falmouth-based candidate in the state Senate race. As Town Clerk Michael Palmer said, there are other towns in those districts, but certainly both of those candidates can take sizable leads in their hometowns, which of course both of them needed to be successful. So there are the results, Falmouth. 75% turnout, 50% of which were before Election Day. Some good results in the local races, varied results in the ballot questions showing that Falmouth's 3 out of 4 voters went to the polls, had their opinions heard, and you got to hear those results right here live on FCTV. And we'll be back in May for the local election. I will be. Doug Brown will be sitting at this table as a candidate. So you're ready to declare your candidacy? You're in for re-election?
Yeah, I'm going to go one more term if they'll have me.
Okay. All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, I've just really enjoyed being here with you today, and I look forward to coming back.
Doug, it's been a pleasure to have you. Select Board member, longstanding involved citizen Doug Brown. I am Troy Clarkson, Falmouth Enterprise columnist, and it has been our pleasure to provide you live election results here on FCTV. Thank you for watching. Thank you for voting. Thank you for caring. We'll see you soon.